So let's face it, most women are not going to naturally have a floodwater response to sexual stimuli, but there are two really surefire ways and techniques that will increase the odds each and every time. Now, the periurethral glands or the Skene's glands is an area that actually sits behind the pubic bone and surrounds the urethra. So if you reach down in that area behind where the pubic hair is supposed to be, there's a bone right there. That's the pubic bone, right? Now, the front of that pubic bone is connected to the deep fascia of the clitoris. Now, if you press the front of the pubic bone or that area right behind it, it feels fantastic because the deep tissues of the clitoris are right there. And the back of that pubic bone is connected to the periurethral glands, the female prostate. So if you're using your finger to explore, you naturally can't go wrong angling upwards and sometimes angling up towards the pubic bone because you're actually going to stimulate the periurethral glands, which sits on top of the vaginal wall, right? Is that making sense? So if we take it one step further, and like if I have a little model that I made of the clitoris really is much bigger than you think it's going to be. You take the clitoris, and so if all of this blue and purple is the clitoris, right? So you got the clitoris up top, you got the clitoris forming the walls of the vagina, and you're stimulating from inside, because remember, clitoris makes up sensitive parts of the vaginal tissue. You start to see why angling upward feels so great. And remember, this area is sitting right behind the pubic bone. So that's why grinding and dancing can actually feel so great, right? Because of this anatomy. Almost 3/4 of women say they don't have orgasm when they're having penetrative sex, let alone squirting. So here is a really small fix that if you stimulate the periurethral glands and the clitoris by switching the focus to have a rhythmic movement and stroke angled upward, and to make sure that there's always going to be some form of pressure in the clitoral areas, even if squirting isn't in the cards, the results will be way more explosive than if you don't. Right? So always make sure that there's some level of clitoral pressure, clitoral friction, or clitoral stimulation to get things going. Right? Now, the second technique is something that's actually has a term for it. It's a Central African technique called kunyaza or kachabali. And this term actually literally means to make urinate. And this practice has been documented. They've studied it because the results of it have been phenomenal. So this is basically where a man rhythmically and continuously strikes the glands of the clitoris. So that would be this area, the outside part, with his erect penis. And what he's actually doing is he's taking and putting it he's holding the head of his penis between his forefinger and his thumb. And he's basically taking it and flicking it on the glands of the clitoris. And he's flicking it in a rhythmic motion, up and down, sideways, backwards, almost like a Zorro type of effect. Now, when you analyze what's happening in this technique, basically what's happening is a small amount of penetration, then removal, then taking the erect penile tissue along with the corona or the head and rhythmically moving it on the exterior of the vagina. So basically using it to stimulate those points on the exterior. Now, if you talk to women and you ask them, say, what is one of the favorite parts of sex that you can recognize? And most women will go to that very first moment that it goes in. What's happening here and what practitioners of kunyaza recognize is that if you focus enough rhythmic attention on the clitoral tissue, that you can potentially have women begging and screaming for more. So this technique that they've actually documented that they're passing down from generation to generation is actually about And it came about historically because women were basically saying, yeah, this is great, but it's not really getting me there. So this technique kind of caught on like wildfire. Men telling their sons, telling their nephews, women telling other women, and it becomes this practice where basically using the penile tissue to stimulate the clitoral tissue without worrying about penetration. And then after she has this ejaculatory squirting experience, then they use even more of that fluid to kind of propel forward the penetrative act. So what this does are two things. One, it creates a deeper connection between the two partners, right? Because it's not all about the penetration and the pounding, but it's also about the connection and making sure that she gets hers before her partner gets theirs. Because we know that women can be multi-orgasmic and have orgasms from so many different things that this just sets the tone and sets the time off right for the trajectory. So if squirting is kind of in the future, if it's been something that you've been considering and wondering if it's for you, if it's something that could happen or that you could help precipitate or take part in the activity, then consider one or both of these techniques, adding it to the repertoire, remembering that the clitoral tissue is really the key to squirting, and that if it's during penetration, what you're going to have to focus on, remember angling upwards so that you can actually reach. Let's talk about female ejaculation, aka squirting, because the great debate continues about whether the gush of fluid is actually urine or something very similar to the male explosion. But also we're going to talk about it because it's something seen as rare and in some societies actually considered to be sacred. So to be able to either have one or to be able to help your partner to have one, let's get to it. So female ejaculation was first described as love juice in ancient Indian textbooks. And during the last 100 years, scientific focus has really been primarily focused on understanding what is it? The makeup of the fluid, which has been thought to either basically be urine, diluted urine, or prostate fluid. Yes, prostate fluid. And in this video, we're going to discuss what the fluid from women who squirt is typically made of. We'll also discuss the anatomy that makes squirting possible because, let's face it, not all women are able. And lastly, we'll discuss two surefire sexual techniques to precipitate geyser-like activity right down there. So let's get into it. So first, let's take a look at this study. Now, although it only follows 2 women, this study shines some great light on this much debated topic of to pee or not to pee. So they took 2 premenopausal women. They were both ages 44 and 45. And these were women who reported that they were able to explode and squirt during orgasms. So they took the samples of their urine before they had sex, and then they actually had to masturbate to get a second sample, which was female ejaculate or their squirting fluid. They looked at the fluid to compare it to the urine sample. And they also took that same fluid and compared it to male prostate fluid to see what exactly the fluid was most similar to. Was it most like urine? Was it a urine mix, or was it like prostate fluid? Now, for those of you who think that squirting is actually just urine, I think you're going to find this to be pretty amazing. So you see W1 equals female ejaculate, and all the way to the right, you see male ejaculate. What you notice, look at the level of PSA or prostatic fluid in female ejaculate, 213, 105, and in male ejaculate, it's between 110 upwards to 2000, right? So there's lots of PSA supporting the fact that this is prostate fluid. And if you notice, comparing the female ejaculate to the voided urine, there aren't a ton of similarities. But what it does appear, based off of this study, is that it's a mix between prostate fluid and some urine, but more similar to prostate fluid than it is to urine. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that when we were looking at these two ladies, the revelation there is that it is close to prostate fluid. Now, most scientific literature distinguishes female ejaculation and squirting as two distinct events with different contexts. Squirting is explained as consisting of a larger amount of water-like liquid, similar to urine, expelled from the urethra. Now, whereas female ejaculation is explained as being a smaller amount, only a few millimeters, like a thick, milky substance, very similar in consistency to male ejaculate, and is thought to originate from prostate glands. The prostate glands in ladies is actually referred to as paraurethral glands. These are glands that actually are surrounding the urethra. Now, you've heard of paraurethral glands probably before. Another name for them are Skene's ducts or glands, vestibular glands, paraurethral glands, periurethral glands, but they're all basically referencing this same structure right here. So if you look here, what you'll see is the clitoris up top. You'll see a urethral opening there, but what's not in this diagram that is missing from a lot, right next to the urethral opening on both sides, there's going to be a small little opening. And those two areas are considered the Skene's ducts, the periurethral glands, the vestibular glands, whatever you want to call it. This seems to be the opening area. And so there's a little bit of back and forth as to where this ejaculate or squirting fluid is actually coming from. Is it coming straight from the urethra, which is where urine comes out? Is it coming from the two glands to the sides of it? And a 2015 scientific article actually really concluded, after testing the squirting fluid from about 7 different women, they actually concluded that it was an involuntary explosion of urine during sexual activity. So this, back in 2015, this study was so popular that women's magazines around the world had headlines like "Squirting is just pee," say scientists. And it really threw things off with the squirting movement, because how can this glorious fluid just be pee? So let me show you a model of the reproductive tract that I put together. Now, this is a homemade model. And what you're looking at here is, this would be considered the vaginal opening, right? This would be considered the vaginal opening. Sitting on top, this would be considered the urethral opening. So if I put this model back up here for you, I want you to see urethral opening, vaginal opening, right? And then this up here is going to be considered the bladder. So what you're looking at in this model is surrounding the urethra. This colored part represents the periurethral glands. Now, the periurethral glands are a gland-like system that sits around the urethra, and as sexual stimulation occurs, these glands actually start to get full. And those two openings that I talk about, that you can actually see when you're looking at the vulva of a woman, are the outside communicating part of the ducts. So these ducts lie surrounding the urethra, and as stimulation is occurring inside and angling upwards, you're actually stimulating the periurethral glands that are wrapped around the urethra. This is why if you angle upwards, you can actually feel kind of an urge to urinate, because there's pressure on the bladder, because the urethra is the communicating tube from the bladder. So just like the prostate encircles the male urethra, the periurethral glands actually circulate and encircle the urethra in the lady. Now, the interesting thing about this is, as the clitoris swells and as these periurethral glands swell, blood flow is coming to the area. This glandular system is becoming engorged with fluid. And as tension and pressure starts to mount, in some cases friction, orgasm occurs. And the elasticity of the glands moving rhythmically with the contraction of the walls of the vagina, the urethra, and the pelvic floor, this coordinated contraction actually helps propel fluid forward in a similar way that the prostate in the male helps propel fluid forward. All right, like this video, share this video. I'll see you next time.